The Home Secretary has excluded Kincora from the new historical child abuse inquiry amid claims that there's been a cover-up by the government and the security services. Some say if the full truth was ever told about what happened here during the Troubles, not just in Kincora, but about everything, it would be too much for our society to cope with, too much for us to handle. Is it time then that we forgot the past and moved on? Chris Moore is the journalist who did a major investigation into the events at Kincora. He's the author of the book, The Kincora Scandal. Chris, are you surprised that Kincora has been excluded from this new inquiry?
No, not at all. Actually, the original inquiry excluded it as well in one of the earlier manifestations.
That seems to be a pattern.
Yeah, and I think the reason for that probably is because there's some embarrassment about the extent in which they knew of events in Kincora but decided to carry on allowing them to occur because they were getting some degree of information or intelligence from people like William McGrath who worked there. And it is shameful that people who suffered abuse there and who've had life-changing consequences are not going to hear anything about what was going on in the minds of the government. Now, the other thing is...
You think it's a cover-up?
I believe there's a cover-up. I believe there's an embarrassment that this was allowed to continue. I think they're embarrassed that someone made a decision to let it go on, even though they had intelligence or information and there were complaints about William McGrath. And William McGrath was, of all of the abusers in Kincora, he was the most violent of all. He was a really nasty piece of work. And the other thing is that about this, the inquiry, what real powers will this inquiry have? I mean, we've had inquiries into Kincora before. They haven't had the remit to actually get inside the files that are in place somewhere that tell the story of Kincora and William McGrath and the involvement of MI5 and McGrath. There's no access to those files. It's a very familiar pattern. MI5 files are kept away. And the people who are trying to set up this inquiry, the Home Office, are the people who most know what was going on because it was under their watch. It's the kind of territory that they look after when it comes to people taking steps to protect the integrity of the state.
Naomi Long is the MP for East Belfast. Naomi, do you believe there's a cover-up?
Well, I certainly think that as long as the government continue to resist including Kincora in this wider inquiry, that will be the suspicion. And I think that part of the reason that I'm appealing to government, and I'm now appealing to the new chair of the CSA inquiry to consider Kincora, is because I think it's important that the current government doesn't fall into the trap of allowing itself in some way to become tainted by what happened in the past, by trying to cover that up or to protect past wrongs, because I think that would be a mistake. I mean, certainly in terms of what has been said, and I have been liaising with the Home Office now on this for some considerable time, there is an indication that, for example, if people give evidence who previously worked in the security forces or indeed in the intelligence services, they will not be prosecuted under the Official Secrets Act. That will apply to Sir Anthony Hart's inquiry here in Northern Ireland, as well as to the new inquiry. There are still, however, questions that I think need to be answered, because the argument from the Home Secretary was that this didn't need to come in the CSA inquiry because the local inquiry would deal with it, that that's where learning for institutions would be best applied in the devolved institutions. However, the learning that we're interested in this case in Kincora isn't for the devolved institutions. It's actually for institutions that are in Whitehall, Secret Services and others. And we want to know what happened at that time politically in terms of cover-up. And it has much more, I think, in common with the scandal surrounding places like Rotherham actually than it does with some of the other institutional child abuse that is being looked at through the HIA inquiry.
Is it really in the same category as Rotherham, or something closer to a Troubles-related event?
Well, I think the involvement and the alleged involvement certainly of the security services, the fact that the allegation is that information was used, that the abuse of children was allowed to continue in order to, for example, gather intelligence and even compromise politicians, for example. All of that suggests that there was a degree of covering up of what happened. But we also don't know how much of that covering up was to protect politicians. I mean, allegations, for example, have been made of people, prominent people from the other side of the water, coming to Kincora and abusing children there. Those allegations need to be probed, and we need to know to what degree this was the establishment covering up something that the establishment was involved in. Now, that actually does have resonance with what was happening in places like Rotherham and other places, and I think it's important that we get the opportunity for the sake of the survivors of that. I mean, I think what Chris says is quite right. I mean, when you meet with these people, when you sit and you talk to them, they have been, in many cases, irreparably damaged by what has happened to them. In some cases, they cope better than others, but all of them would say that it has left an indelible mark on their lives and has changed their lives for the worse, and not being listened to, not being taken seriously, not having the state acknowledge that not only did it fail in its duty to protect them, but more than that, it permitted abuse to continue even after the point where it became aware of that abuse.
Chris Moore.
All of that has compounded the hurt.
Yeah, I think there's another element to this as well, and I think recently when I spoke to a guy called Richard Kerr, who was in Kincora, and he told me that he was the living proof of something that previously we hadn't got any real evidence of, but he was able to tell us how he was taken outside Kincora, and I think that's a new element that really needs proper investigation. Initially, he was telling us that he was taken to places in Northern Ireland and in the Republic, and he named a few hotels where he was taken. But more recently, and I've kept in touch with him in America, and more recently, he's hinting that perhaps he was involved in his time in London with something else, that he may have been involved in other events in London that related, came very close to people in Westminster and the Palace of Westminster. So I think there are issues there that the proper inquiry should look into, but whether or not they have the stomach to do so, I don't believe they have, and I think that the element is still there to try and keep this quiet.
I think the issue is that the Home Office continue to believe that this was, if you like, a local issue, that the learning will come for local institutions, and therefore it's best that it's dealt with through the kind of local inquiry which has taken place. I'm certainly not criticising the work that Sir Anthony Hart's inquiry is doing. It's very important work, and I'm not in any way dismissing his commitment to trying to find the truth about Kincora, but I do believe that at the centre of this is a much more serious allegation around the use of the intelligence services to cover up and to prolong the pain of the children who were involved. And I think the only way we can really get to the bottom of that is to include it within the CSA inquiry so that it falls under their remit, because, again, as Chris has said, there are these allegations that children were not just brought to Kincora to be abused, but were taken from Kincora to other places to be abused, that the people who abused them were not all from Northern Ireland. Those are very serious allegations that would point up that there was more of a conspiracy around this, and therefore it's really important that if the geographical boundaries weren't respected in terms of the abusers, why should they be respected in terms of an inquiry? We've got to leave no stone unturned.
Naomi, thank you.
It may well, William, I just want to say, for many of the victims, this may well be their last opportunity to get truth. And so I haven't given up. The Home Secretary said yesterday that in the end of the day, it would be up to Justice Goddard what she wanted included. Okay. And I'll be making representations to her in that respect.
Mike Nesbitt, the Unionist leader and also former Victims Commissioner, is also with us.
Could I also say, by the way, on Kincora, because I heard a little bit of what was going on there, I'm very unhappy that Kincora isn't part of the national debate, and I've been liaising with the Home Secretary about this. The difference about Kincora that makes it different from the other institutions that the Historical Institutional Abuse Inquiry is looking at with Sir Anthony Hart, is that as well as there being abuse, and we know there was abuse because 3 people have been convicted of it, there is also this suspicion that it was known about at the highest level in government by members of the security forces.
And some say it's a bit more than suspicion, Mike.
Yeah, I know. And there's no other way to put it, honestly, except to say that these people, if it is true, used vulnerable young people as sexual bait to trap people of influence so that they could either extract information for them that they felt would be useful, or to exercise influence over them, up to and including blackmail.
Yeah, to
and
compromise
if that is true,
people.
that is a national scandal. It doesn't matter whether it happened in Birmingham, Belfast, Edinburgh, Cardiff.
And if it's
National
true, you can
scandal.
understand why they don't want the truth coming out.
Well, you see, so Theresa May says to me, Sir Anthony will have full cooperation from and access to people and papers, including MI5. That means she is asking me to take it on trust. What is the value that is shattered first when there's abuse, such as the abuse of Kincora? The first value to go, William,
It's trust. Yeah.
So you cannot build an inquiry by saying the fundamental building block of the values will be trust.
Mike.
It just doesn't work.